one of the strangest tanks in military history, inspired by the wheels of a horse carriage and built because its engineers thought it was actually a brilliant idea. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the Tsar Tank. It's 1914. World War I is raging across Europe. Millions of soldiers are trapped in trenches stretching across the continent. Battlefields are filled with mud, barbed wire, and trenches several meters wide. Military commanders keep asking the same question: how are we supposed to cross these trenches? The British are developing tanks. The French are experimenting with different armored vehicles. The Russians, however, believed these ordinary projects were too conventional and not ambitious enough. They wanted something unusual, something that would give them an edge over their enemies. While engineers across Europe were desperately trying to invent machines capable of winning the war, Russian engineer Nikolai Lebedenko happened to notice something interesting. Looking out of a window, he saw a large horse carriage effortlessly rolling over rocks and rough terrain. At that moment, he came up with an idea. If large wheels can overcome obstacles so easily, why not build a gigantic war machine with enormous wheels? Lebedenko became convinced that this design could be turned into a weapon that would lead Russia to victory. He gathered several engineers into a room and presented his idea. Of course, nobody could simply tell an important engineer, "Have you completely lost your mind? This is ridiculous." So instead, they tried to figure out how such a bizarre concept could actually work. A war machine with enormous wheels. What kind of vehicle could possibly win the war? Eventually, the engineers decided it should be a tank. The plan was simple. Attach two gigantic wheels at the front, each almost 9 meters in diameter, and place a much smaller balancing wheel at the rear. The vehicle would also be equipped with machine gun turrets. At this point, you can't help but ask, why is the entire weight of this gigantic machine resting on one tiny rear wheel? Well, classic engineering problems. That's not really our concern. Imagine you're advancing across the battlefield when suddenly two gigantic wheels appear on the horizon. By the time you figure out what this strange machine actually is, enemy soldiers have probably already surrounded you. The Tsar Tank's design was truly extraordinary. According to the plans, it would easily roll over trenches, mud, and battlefield obstacles. On paper, it looked incredibly impressive. But history is full of projects that looked amazing on paper. The engineers built a miniature version of the tank and presented it to Lebedenko. He then decided to demonstrate it to Tsar Nicholas II himself. He went to the imperial palace, had a brief conversation with the Tsar, and then placed the miniature tank on the palace carpet. Tsar Nicholas II began moving the little tank around. Yes, the ruler of the entire Russian Empire was literally driving a toy tank across the floor. When the miniature successfully rolled across the carpet without any problems, the Tsar was impressed. He approved the project and reportedly provided virtually unlimited funding, demanding that the full-sized Tsar Tank be built as quickly as possible. Seriously, I'm not joking. That's pretty much what happened. By 1915, the full-sized Tsar Tank had been completed. The big day had finally arrived. The engineers were probably extremely excited. Some of them were likely already dreaming of medals. The vehicle was started. The engines roared to life. The gigantic wheels began to turn. The first few meters looked promising. The front wheels easily rolled over several obstacles. And then, disaster struck. The small rear wheel sank into soft ground. Badly. The vehicle couldn't move. No matter how much power was applied, the enormous war machine remained hopelessly stuck in the mud. After witnessing this, the engineers were probably thinking, maybe we should have made the rear wheel a little bigger. Unfortunately, the rear wheel wasn't the only problem. The vehicle itself was enormous. This made it an extremely easy target on the battlefield. For enemy artillery crews, the Tsar Tank was basically a moving building screaming, "Here I am. Please, shoot at me." Its armor was also relatively thin and unlikely to withstand heavy artillery fire. In other words, surviving for long on the battlefield would have been extremely difficult. In short, the project looked spectacular, but it simply wasn't practical. As a result, the Tsar Tank became far more famous for its appearance than for its actual performance. Following the unsuccessful trials, the project was cancelled. The Tsar Tank was abandoned at the testing site for years. The giant machine slowly rusted away. Eventually, it was dismantled for scrap, and so one of history's strangest tanks quietly took its place in the history books. Still, the Tsar Tank teaches us something important. Engineering sometimes requires unusual ideas. Even failed projects can pave the way for future successes. Although the very first lesson learned from this project was probably this: never make the rear wheel too small. Or perhaps, sometimes, copying your enemy's successful designs isn't such a bad idea after all.